I have the absolute best job today because I have been able to introduce some really incredible and amazing speakers. And our next lineup, I am just so honored to be able to introduce them. We have Bradley Hightower from Hightower Clinical, Danielle Mitchell from Black Women in Clinical Research, and Laura Holtz from Yale School of Medicine.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, SOCRA, for this opportunity to speak today. And thank you to all of you for, as Jessica said, sticking it out with us to the end, very bitter end of this conference, because we hope that we're still going to bring you lots of good nuggets of information and ideas to take back with you when you leave this wonderful and exciting and in-person conference. We started this conference on day one with Tammy Naiseth, our Presidential Award recipient, by teaching us the ABCs. Such a wonderful way to start with the basics in the beginning. But they were to be authentic, to be bold, and to be curious. Clinical research is pushing the bounds. We are the innovators. And to Quincy's list, I'm going to add another I am. The research professionals, we get to say, I am a leader. Today, we are going to discuss strategies about how to have an effective clinical research team to lead and have opportunities to rise to meet the challenges that the innovations, the technologies, the advances are presenting us with. We're going to talk about developing relationships with the research sites. We all must work together, regardless of your position with a sponsor, with an investigator, with a site, with a data team, with an IRB. We must all be in this together to ensure that we can make successful research happen. And finally, we need to create a legacy. We have heard the two previous speakers today talking about things like what are the concerns and the barriers that we face in clinical research? What are the problems that we must overcome to continue? What are the needs of our continued workforce in the coming years? So we need to create a legacy and a passion for clinical research, and that must start with those professionals who are here in the room. We must lead that charge. So to begin, as we are researchers, we'd like to set a standard, a definition for all of us to use as we're using as a reference. So I'd like to use this definition by Brene Brown, a researcher out of Houston and the author of Dare to Lead. She says, I define a leader as anyone who takes the responsibility for finding the potential in people and in processes and having the courage to develop that potential. There's that C that we learned about the first day, courage. It is going to take us to that courage and perseverance and reliance to ensure that our profession continues to be at the forefront of innovation. Not only that, I want to define one other key word in this is that leaders can be anyone. It is not based on your title. It is not based on your responsibility, but yet it's based on your attitude. It's based on being authentic, that you get to take these opportunities, strive to reach them, and grow with them. So when we leave the conference, we leave this energized and positive environment and go back to our workplaces where we know there are emails waiting, and crisis, and fires, and patients coming in first thing on Monday morning, tomorrow morning, some of us having gotten in after a really, really late flight back home. How do we drive ourselves to reach for those passions, for those potentials, and for those opportunities when we know we have tasks to do? I am a teacher by training, and so what I love to do is to propose ideas and strategies so that you come away saying, I can do that. I have an idea and a way and a path forward. But when we think about our teams, we have so many members on our teams. We have our immediate team who we trust and know explicitly. But then we have our extended or our ancillary teams. Think about who you must work with in order to complete that research. You may have one protocol that has to go to an IRB team. they are part of your team. It has to go to a lab, they are part of your team. It has to go to sites, they are part of your team. Our teams are enormous, they're complex, and they're comprehensive, but we must think of ourselves as one team working together. GCP has done a great job about defining some of our roles. We have definitions about who is a sponsor and what they're responsible for. We have our investigators, they tell us what we're responsible for. I, as a CRA, I know what my responsibilities are as a monitor, but how we work in those teams together is not as clear. But I do love GCP for providing us with things like documentation, Alcoa, best practices, data integrity, things that these processes that are lined up for us. But again, the question still remains of, when the gauntlet was thrown down this morning by Quinty, how do we achieve these things? How do we do this? So let's talk about that. One way to start is to think about our why. Simon Sinek is an author of the book Starting with Why, and he outlines that this conceptual framework will move us from our task-based work to a passion-driven agenda. He states that the why is our filter and our focus. We have so many things to do every single day. I was a coordinator for 15 years. I have been in the trenches with you, and I understand and recognize that our days are full of task-based. But if we frame it around our passion and our why, and it's our collective why, as well as our individual why, we then understand what we should be doing and what gives us permission to say what we won't be doing, what isn't within our why. In a 2013 Harvard Business Review article, it explains that why anchors our teams and serves research, moral, our cultural compass during project management, execution, and implementation, and it establishes trust. Our first morning at this conference, our representatives from the FDA and Health Canada told us that trust was paramount. And again, we're hearing this over and over again, but how do we build trust? That's a very complicated and a large endeavor, but can be simplified with small changes in our day-to-day, such as refocusing every day on why we do this. The why we do this is for our participants. In the light of those crises and those fires that are hitting your email box, to remember our participants are our why. My why is my grandfather, who was treated for colorectal cancer when I was 7 in the 90s. He flew to Germany for a clinical trial, came back scared because he didn't understand what was happening, but he extended his life for his 12 grandchildren for another couple months. And more closely related to me, and on my shoulder today, is my grandmother, who during my time as a coordinator, I worked in studies on dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and she was one of my study participants. The existence of community-based participatory research networks, patient advocacy groups will help us to ensure that each of our participants' voices are heard. It just takes an email. It takes a voice for them to come to the room and we can hear what they are interested in our research. Each of us has a specific area and there are groups who want to talk to you, but we need to take the first step to invite them to the table. In this day of media and social media, we have every resource at our fingertips. We just have to make that time to send it. Establishing trust within the research teams will ensure that our missions are met, that why is at the forefront, and so we can continue to build that trust in those small, nuanced little actions that we are adding to our day. Even if you commit to doing one per week, if we are intentional about those whys, then we can bring research to the population. We can help to educate and we can help to inspire. We can break down those barriers that Quincy talked about this morning where we all raised our hands and we know that they exist. But it does take us each lifting it up collectively to break them down. Marcus started a study about that as the lead author of Leadership Lessons, Building and Leading High-Performing Clinical Research Teams. There is research out there on leading high-performing clinical teams. Again, if we had time to read it. So let me tell you a little bit about what it said. So he said the mission for the research group describes its purpose and reason for existing, along with its values and overarching purpose. And in no part of that definition did I say anything about a protocol or regs. It's rather that we're looking at the why we're doing research as a whole. Clinical research, unlike many other professions, has the mission and values clearly written out for us in our ethical doctrines. Quick raise of hands. When was who has read the Belmont Report or the Declaration of Helsinki? Okay, great. I love that that number has continued to increase each year that I ask that question. But maybe we make a charge or a promise today that on Clinical Trials Day, May 30th, that we all sit down with our teams for 30 minutes and read it. Understand where the foundations of our research and our regulations are coming from, and understand and articulate our why. Reviewing and discussing these foundational documents will create a shared experience within your team. When we've all read it together, we all know that we're working towards it together. And that together will be that foundation of trust. But I would be amiss to not talk about our protocols. We are so grounded in those protocols. We so look to them for guidance. But yet, who has ever looked at a protocol that has been without gaps or without missing parts or things that contradict each other? Protocols are written by humans. We make mistakes. We might fail, but a failure is a first attempt at learning. That was something that was told to me this week, and I said, okay, that's something that's going up on my memory wall, something that I'm going to remind myself, that we are learning. And so it's not with judgment that we have failed, but rather it's an opportunity to find the potential in the people and processes to make it better. As technology advances, we need to be working quicker. That time to delivery cannot continue at the rates that we're going. But we are the ones who have to make the decision to look at those opportunities and to take them. But yet we can't do this while we're just continuing to look forward at the problems and the issues. We have to take a measure of how we're doing and celebrate our successes. Marcus added that clear expectations and transparency in priorities and deadlines are important to high-functioning teams, especially for large groups and those with shared resources. Think about those shared teams that you have, your labs, your IRBs, your data management structures. Every team has expectations and timelines and due dates. But if we are clear with each other, we can dispel and dismiss some of those hardships, those tumbling stones, the hard feelings, the anger that we have to overcome in our day-to-day. Using achievement metrics, countdown clocks, metrics trackers, baselines will help us to determine how we're doing and will give us opportunities to evaluate success and stop and celebrate that we are doing good work. We are doing good work every day, but we need to give ourselves the credit where credit is due. Back home in Indiana, we have something called the greatest spectacle in racing every single year. And while it's exciting to see the cars running around the track at more than 200 miles an hour, I also look at this race in seconds. Those pit stop changes where they're making sure that the car is safe, where they're making sure that they have energy and resources and fuel to continue going, it is this area that I see examples of spectacular teams. And it's my favorite race car driver. Leading successful teams ensures that we must be honest about the strength of our teams. In this week's talk, we've heard about the turnover and the transition, the hardships in finding key personnel. If we're talking about our team's strength, we can identify where there's areas and opportunities to elevate people within our team, not the managers, but rather the key people who are invested in our teams to rise up. identifying that when you get a new member on your team, you go back to forming a new team, because that team is not the same. You must go through storming and crisis situations and work through them together to establish trust. So labeling where your team is and identifying where your pathway is to keep going forward is one step that we can utilize for achieving leadership in the clinical research teams. Additionally, we need to empower our teams. We need to lead and empower through diversity, inclusion, and exclusion. We need to promote, we need to advocate for, and we need to increase based on merit when it's due. And if our institution does not allow it, which mine does not often be grant-based funding, I need to find other ways. So it's maybe talking about somebody's name in a room where there's opportunities for growth. Maybe it's a challenge coin type of initiative like the military uses. Or maybe it's just giving a piece of paper that celebrates each person's contributions and individuality. It's finding where the people's strengths are and making sure that everybody knows it. In a 2014 paper about the importance of diversity and interpersonal skills, team diversity and interpersonal skills are strongly influenced successes of research trials and outcomes. So what can we do? I'd like you to consider some opportunities that I've encountered in my experiences, and I know that you have others that you have in your own. So to share these experiences so people can utilize this information to add to their repertoire. Maybe assess the diversity of your candidate pool, not based off of who looks like the job description, but rather, and based off of teachable skills, but maybe based off of skills and experiences. Find your non-traditional hire that is going to be your greatest achievement. When applying for the job, tell your story. Be authentic in telling why you are excellent for this fit, that you can learn the skills, but that you bring with you knowledge and passion for this industry, and share that with others, including the new generations that we just heard about in the last talk, so they know they can be successful here too. Third, if you're managing your teams, look for those ways to highlight your team members. Look for ways to empower and lift them up, because it is not that there was only room for one leader. There are room for everybody in this room to lead with authentic and the capacity that you bring to research and a passion that goes forward with it. We need to create culture through our actions, through our missions, through our work, to ensure that our teams can be successful so that we can meet the demands of research that we know are coming forth. So in conclusion of my section, when you're working with those research teams, those frontline people who are interacting with our populations, our study populations day in and day out, let's assure that they know what our team's mission is. Develop it, create it together so that we can all move forward together. Secondly, honestly assess where your team's at. It's not a failure if you're just forming or storming, because you have a plan to get to a high-functioning, performing team. And finally, empower all team members to embrace leadership. There is enough opportunities, there's enough work for all of us to be able to move into a leadership role, take it, and achieve, so that we can all feel that we are a part of something bigger. Next, I'd like to, at the conclusion of this, I want to turn it over to Brad, because this sounds great at the research site, or within the research team, it's part of what we can control. But now we need to talk about where leadership exists between the research sites. And so I'd like to bring up Brad to talk about that as his area of expertise.
Hey, thanks guys. It's a little surreal to be here. I'm not a big, avid conference goer. I spend a lot of time doing podcasts and live streams, so if anybody wants to shout out at me, then that might make me feel a little more at home. There you go. There you go. I appreciate that. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. My name's Brad. I've worked at my whole career at research sites, about 15 years. Broke off and started a small site network. I'll be really honest, the first 3 or 4 years I spent in research, I hated it. right? It was terrible. I mean, I hate to paint that. I hate to paint that picture, but it took me a really long time to sort of figure things out. I became increasingly cynical as we saw our relationships with sponsors. Obviously as a site, you're sort of oftentimes wedged between all kinds of different parties, but our relationship with sponsors go poorly because of various reasons. So one thing I really started to focus on and understand the value in is developing relationships. Are there sponsors here today? Okay, I'm very sorry. I hope that this really applies to more than just developing relationships with sites. I mean, to echo Laura, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to accomplish the same thing. So whether it's an MSL or a CRA or even your own PI as a site, I think all of these values should really apply to all of them. So look, we're in an interesting time. I think the site voice is starting to become a lot more prominent. I think that's probably, helped out a lot by organizations like SOCRA. So props to SOCRA for giving, more of a voice to sites. I've sat through a lot of presentations and sessions, and, I think it's been really cool to hear the diversity of sites. Sites all operate so differently. It's a very complicated landscape, but I feel very positive, whether you believe that or not, based off of some of my comments in the past. But so oftentimes I feel like this slide where we're sort of pointing at a sponsor and being like, "Hey, the study's not working. This is your fault. What's up?" And the sponsor's looking at us saying, "Well, you're not doing your job. What's the problem here?" So this is the conundrum, and we still see this a lot, right? I don't know about you guys. Do you guys see this at sites? Do you feel the tension, and do sponsors feel the tension with sites? Things can get ugly really fast. So I just want to talk a little bit about, how maybe we can help each other, do a better job. And, I would be remiss if I didn't say, look, the roles are defined in GCP, like Jessica said. I don't care about the regs, all right? The regs tell us the roles and responsibilities, but they're not very prescriptive in how this is done, right? So obviously at the end of the day, these sort of like bare minimum things need to be accomplished, but there's so much outside of this black and white that truly affects how successful, all the way down to a study can be, not to mention a site itself or a sponsor itself or a drug. It makes me sad to think of all the drugs that maybe have not made it to market because of poorly laid relationships, so that a study can't enroll. If you think about that, I'm sure that, I don't know if there's data on this, but that it must be a fairly high number. So again, I think we have to do a better job. So how does this happen, right? Everyone's excited when you start a study. It's great. Got a study, we're going to enroll 1,000 patients. The sponsor loves us. Everything looks great. Things can go downhill very quickly. And honestly, probably the biggest theme I really want to talk about is just trust and transparency. So I guess themes. And I know there's been talk about trust all throughout this, but it starts at the very beginning. I think we're seeing some interesting techniques that sponsors are taking now, because ultimately I think a lot of it comes down to the relationships that sites have with their sponsors. And it really runs the gamut if you're at a site. We have studies where we just get lobbed, a bunch of zip files, and you're like, "Hey, here's the study, you're awarded, figure it out." And then you've got sponsors who are now employing their own sort of site-facing staff, or not, site-facing roles rather, the site relationship liaison, if you will, which I think is a beautiful thing. And I think we have to sort of stop getting away from each study being a simple transaction and really building a greater relationship between sites and sponsors. Ultimately, I think that's what we both want, right? You don't want to walk in, feel like, can you do the study or not? No? Okay, bye. I think it behooves both parties to really develop that relationship. And as we've seen, throughout this week, site models are vary wildly, and they're varying more and more every day. You've got large academic institutions, you've got community providers who are doing their own research, and then sort of everything in between in terms of IROs, SMOs, name an acronym, there's probably a site model based around it. But that's not well communicated in a 60-page feasibility questionnaire, right? I feel like oftentimes this is lost, and sites aren't able to, receive the information they need to make a good decision about whether or not to take on a trial, nor are they giving sponsor good enough information to determine if they're a good fit for their trial. Frankly, none of us want to take on studies that we can't put patients in and we can't help people with. It doesn't do us any good, to waste everybody's time and spin wheels. I feel like, how many of you out there would consider yourselves small sponsors on the smaller side? No, nobody? Okay, well, the small sponsors tend to do a better job, I feel, in developing these relationships. For whatever reason, maybe it's because they don't have 1,000 molecules that they're trying to deal with so they can spend more time. But again, the more time that's spent in front of the site, I think behooves the sponsor. And again, we're seeing this, I think, improve. But again, transparency is a big deal too. And that goes, again, both ways. How many studies have you taken that you don't know who the vendors are yet? Or you don't know any number of things. You don't know what you don't know. And it happens so often. We get a trial, it looks great, only to find out like, oh, wait, there's this wacky thing over here that is now making it impossible for us to enroll patients. That has to be, we have to do a better job. Again, I think we're setting up sites for failure when we're not being transparent with those. And look, I get it, these are complicated. There's a lot of silos that happen on the back end with the sponsors, it seems. And the more people I talk to, the more I learn that nobody knows what anyone else is doing. So teams seem to be putting together, these vendor packages. This guy didn't talk to this guy. This team doesn't know what this team's doing. And pretty soon you've got a mess of technology. So that's a little maybe outside the scope of this conversation. But nonetheless, having someone on the sponsor side who can really put those pieces together and really walk through the sites with what that looks like. Because again, we want to do a good job, and we just I don't think we're getting enough information up front. As a result, we're giving bad information back, and we end up with, this vicious circle of, well, the site lied to us. They said they could enroll 10 patients a month. I'm like, well, you lied to us because you said this was going to happen. And again, it can get ugly pretty fast. So trust and transparency is huge. Again, I still think we're not doing a good enough job. Aside from that, a lot comes down to simple communication. I think, I don't know if Christina Barnes, I believe, did a talk yesterday and talked about TEACH, which is a sort of a communication method. That's great. Frankly, it's probably way better than what I'm about to talk about. So you should check out her talk if you haven't. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we're human beings at the site level, right? A lot of us, we want to come in, we want to do our jobs, and we want to go home, right? We have families, we have work-life balance we want to maintain. So the more effective communication is, I think the more that helps the site. So look, email, obviously right now seems to be the choice of communication. We can have another argument about that if you want to, but be concise. If you're going to send an email, please don't write me a 14-page email. I see it. And be clear. Don't include a bunch of unnecessary stuff. Please don't ask 12 questions. And this goes the other way. If you've ever emailed a PI and asked 3 questions, and then you get back yes, and you're like, well, yes to which one? I don't understand. This kind of thing happens all the time. It sounds small, but it's very impactful. And then, courteous is sort of usually the last one, but I like to just say, just be cool. When I was, we talked about doing this presentation, I was almost like, I could sum the whole thing up and just say like, hey, be cool. That's all we want. I think we sometimes tend to over-professionalize our communication, if that makes sense. Like, it looks like you went to a thesaurus to try to write this email. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, we're both human beings trying to get a job done, so let's convey this in the most easy and concise manner possible, because it leads to confusion, and then if I have to call you and track you down, then we've just wasted more time. So again, it seems like a relatively small and probably thing that doesn't need to go said, but it does. And again, just be a human. Don't copy everyone in the world if they don't need to be on an email. I think sponsors oftentimes underappreciate the relationship between the CRC and the PI and how that can sometimes be a delicate relationship. If my PI is getting hammered by emails that are, unrelated to them, but they're seeing a conversation that I'm having with the sponsor, then a lot of times they become disengaged and they're like, what do I do with this? Why are they emailing me this stuff? And then of course, I'm saying, oh, don't worry about it, which feels very self-serving. And, of course, PI doesn't want me throwing myself under the bus if they're on some of these conversations. But again, getting a little rambly here, but I think you get the idea. I think it's like the minimum effective amount of communication is usually what's best. So in some ways, that's a little counterintuitive to saying, we need more trust building, but I think we can find a nice balance between concise, effective communication and an emphasis on, the actual relationship building, because you can't build a relationship over 3 emails. It does take more than that. So look, that's easy, right? You guys good? Everybody's going to be friends now? Ultimately, and actually before that, I will give another little anecdote that kind of goes back to the communication side. And again, if you didn't listen to Christina's speech, if you can find it, you should. Because I recently received an email from a CRA at a very small CRO. We had just had our first monitor visit. I had a relatively new coordinator. And I get copied on an email that also the PI was copied on. And it's no exaggeration. I think there was like a 12-page report at the end, which I thought was full of insane findings that I was like, wow, you guys really went hard. So I rifled off an email. I waited a couple days. I didn't hear anything. And then pretty soon I find out sponsor's now gone to the PI, and they don't want me involved in the trial at all anymore. And so I was like, well, that's weird. So I went back and I read the email, and I sounded like a lunatic. I did not follow these rules. So I think having some grace with each other, because again, we're all doing the best that we can. And something that Christina pointed out is maybe make a draft of those emails sometimes when emotions are hot, and I tend to get hot more often than I should, probably. But anyways, again, it's not hard, but it is challenging to create a good relationship with sites. Again, it takes a lot of, I believe, sort of dynamism, if you will, because sites are different. Some very academic sites may need to be approached differently than small private sites. I know that's not something people want to hear, but that's not an easily scalable thing to do. It requires time, and it requires time in front of people at sites. But ultimately, the difference it can make is huge. I was at a conference last week, and someone said, well, I got a site on the phone, and they're just like, we don't have time for your study. And I was like, yeah, probably because your study's terrible, and probably because you're not giving the site resources and building a relationship with that site, because a well-designed study with a supportive team will get the attention of our staff every single time. And that's the frustration of the site. I think sites have limited resources. That's been discussed, ad nauseum at this point. So at the end of the day, sites have to choose the sponsors and the studies that are most well supported and put together the best, if that makes sense. It's just a simple cost-benefit analysis. So that's really it. Those are all the slides I have. I still think relationships remain extremely undervalued, and that's at every single juncture along the clinical trial process, whether it be, again, PI and CRC, CRC, CRA, CTM, CTL, MSL, a bunch of acronyms. If you got an acronym, focus on having a good relationship with another acronym, okay? So that's all I got, guys. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I like to get close to the mic. Thank you so much for having me, SOCRA. Thank you, Laura, also. Oh, I forgot, I turned my head. Thank you, Laura, for having me as well. I'm so excited to be here at my first SOCRA conference. And, you know, when I came to Montreal, I thought that I really, before this, I thought that my French was pretty good. I really did. But I found out while being here that my French needs some work. But the beauty of this is that when I took my Uber here, I was able to speak some French to my driver, and he actually understood me. So I think I would make my French teachers pretty proud of me. So I said kudos to myself. So today also, before I start, I feel like I'm channeling my Janet Jackson, you see the? So, a lot of times, too, earlier when we were talking about, when the other speaker was talking about the colors and what we wear. So I know that helps, especially when we're talking about being inspired. And this is my power outfit. So I will go ahead and get started. No, sorry, y'all. I forgot about this, too, as well. Yesterday, I received news that my aunt passed away. So I just wanted to dedicate my talk to my Aunt Nancy. But I'm not going to cry, I promise. But I just wanted to dedicate this to her because she had lung cancer. And so thank you, Auntie Nancy, for being my inspiration. So, no crying on the podium. That's what I remember before what we said. So I'm going to be talking about creating a legacy and how to be inspired in your clinical research journey. So we are going to be talking about two topics today. We're going to be talking about networking, how to network, when to network, and what is outreach? What does outreach look like to you? And inclusivity in research. And we're also going to be talking about how to find your passion and how to be true to what you have been called to do. So when I'm listening to all of the speakers and I'm thinking about my talk, all of our topics, and it's touching on everything. So I know that we are all connected. I was thinking about Quincy when he was talking about how he stumbled, into clinical research, and a lot of people say that, but I always say that too. Clinical research found me. So let's talk about what does inclusivity mean? And I know that this is a heavy definition, but I'm going to read it. I promise I won't read any other slides except for this one. But this means the practice of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. So this is a lot to unpack here. Like, what does inclusivity mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? So I want you to take some time to think about, what does inclusivity mean to you? So now that you have thought about what inclusivity means to you, it means more than a buzzword. It's not an add-on. It needs to be involved in all areas of research. It needs to be involved in the patient population and in the clinical research workforce. So I remember when I was a coordinator, we had low enrollment numbers for our studies. So I asked my principal investigator, why are our numbers so low? What can I do to help? And he said, honestly, Danielle, I see so many patients a day that I forget to ask them about participating in a clinical trial. So it really dawned on me when he said this, that people aren't being asked to participate in clinical trials. A lot of times we think that people don't want to participate, but if you never ask anyone, then they never have that opportunity. And I also think about when I was a child and when someone wouldn't invite me to a party. I used to think, I'm the life of the party. Why wouldn't they want to invite me? But I always felt like when I wasn't invited, that I was excluded. So it's important to allow people to have that opportunity to be involved in clinical research, whether it's a patient or whether it's working in clinical research. I know for me, I found out about clinical research at a pool party. So what would have happened? Where would I be if someone didn't tell me about clinical research at a pool party? So I felt included when my college classmate told me about clinical research and said, you should consider this as a career. So when we think about inclusivity in research, we have to think about embracing different race, gender, ethnicity, everyone. Everyone needs a seat at the table. So we have to foster an environment that feels safe for people. You know, a safe space where people can ask questions and not feel as if their questions won't get answered. So a lot of times we always talk about the patient population, but we don't talk about the diversity in the workforce. People feel comfortable with people who look like them. Diverse professionals recruit diverse patients. And so I have so many stories where people have told me, when I tell them I'm in clinical research, and I'll just share a quick story. One of the ladies that I met said, my mother was having breast surgery, and I was really nervous, and I was sitting in the clinic waiting for the doctor to come in. And she said, while she's waiting, a black doctor walks in, and she asked her, "Can I hug you?" So she said she immediately felt like a relief because she felt like her mother had someone who could understand her. So I always, keep these stories, with me because it makes me want to make sure that the clinical research industry is diverse. I promise you, I keep clinical research in my back pocket. I talk about it wherever I go. And so I encourage you to incorporate it everywhere you go, whether it's at the airport, the grocery store. I have told grocery clerks before about clinical research. I will talk about clinical research to anyone. And I encourage you to talk about clinical research as well, because a lot of people don't know that clinical research even exists. And when we think about it, clinical research is not taught in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. So we have to do our part. Now that we are clinical research professionals, we have to give back. We have to go to those career fairs, tell children about clinical research. Recently in Michigan, I went to a career fair, and I was really shocked with how much the students were interested in clinical research. I was so afraid of my talk being boring. I'm like, these kids they're gonna be like, please sit down, Miss Danielle. But they were so interested, they raised their hand, they had questions. So we have to give people an opportunity to learn more about clinical research because, and like we said before, a lot of times we are in our clinical research bubble. So we have to talk to people outside of the clinical research industry if we want to bring more people in. So let's talk about networking. I am a big networker. I apologize if you have received any messages from me, but a lot of times I like to plant seeds. I will hop in your inbox. I will shoot my professional shot. I want to connect with you. So I encourage you as well to shoot your professional shot. Don't be afraid. A lot of times fear holds people back from connecting and networking, but you have to think about it. It's not easy. But you have to practice. You have to practice having those conversations, and it's okay if someone doesn't respond to you. You might receive a lot of no's or someone just ignores your message, but it's okay. So continuously keep attending conferences, networking with people. And so when I was looking at the SOCRA app, I could see that there was all of the different people that are present here at the conference. I encourage you to scroll down the list of all the people that are here. Reach out to, this is your homework, reach out to about 5 new people on the SOCRA app that you haven't had a chance to talk to. And LinkedIn is a gold mine. I'm on LinkedIn more than Facebook. So, and a lot of times people think of LinkedIn as they think of it just as professional, but people really want to have relationships. It's a relationship, it's like relationship/professional, but, tell people happy birthday. Tell people congratulations, like posts, comment posts. Don't go on Facebook and not interact, because that's how you stop your growth. So when we think about outreach as well, what does outreach mean to you? And I mentioned this before. I'm a walking clinical research advertisement. If you see me, you might see me with a shirt, something. I am all clinical research. And it wasn't until clinical research found me that I finally felt connected to my career. I knew that this was the place for me. And, a lot of times we have to determine what our why is. And like Laura was saying, determining your why will help you on those days that it's challenging. My why is my grandmother. My grandmother had breast cancer. And so I made it my mission to help other women who had breast cancer as well. And so clinical research was the best career option for me. And I'm so glad to meet everyone. You guys are so supportive. I'll tell you, I can reach out to anyone and they'll be like, hey, Danielle, I can help you. So definitely when you think about outreach, think about going outside, because you are a trusted community partner. You are now an expert. So be that person that you wish would have showed up for you when you were younger to tell you about clinical research. And I tell people this too. My whole family is in clinical research. So because I have told so many people about clinical research, my husband's in clinical research, my sister's in clinical research, my aunt's in clinical research, my cousin's in clinical research. So be that person in your community that can talk about clinical research. So how do you define your passion? And I touched on this before. It really deals with determining your why. What excites you? I know a lot of times when I can't sleep at night, I might have to get a notebook and write things down. That's what you want to focus on. And so a lot of times people aren't sure about what their passion is, but if there is something that keeps you up at night or something that you feel, hey, this is a good idea, don't wait for anyone to tell you that this is a good idea. You don't need confirmation from anybody. And it's important after you define your passion to set goals. And it's okay if your goals, sometimes you have to cross out your goals, or sometimes you have to start over. But if you have a timeline, and I'm old school, I like to write it down. I need to see it, and I need to achieve it. And so once you have set your goals, there are going to be challenges. There are going to be speed bumps, there's going to be roadblocks, but it's important to move through those challenges and to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. I ask for help all the time. And so once you have embraced these challenges, it's time to take action. Take off. I'm giving you your opportunity today after this conference, from everything that you have learned from everyone, to take off. You don't need to wait on anyone. I know that, because I've talked to you guys, that we all have ideas. We all have a voice. So how do you leave a legacy? You leave a legacy. When I think of legacy, I should back up. I think about impact. How do you make an impact? You make an impact by sharing your knowledge. You make an impact by inspiring the next generation of future clinical research leaders and creating a positive influence. You make an impact and create a legacy through people. How do you want people to remember you? What are they going to say about you for generations to come? As long as you help one person, that's enough. Thank you so much.
So in conclusion, we would like to inspire you today to leave a call to action to you, ask you to consider your teams. Make sure that you're taking care of each other, those extensive teams. Consider your relationships with your sponsors and your sites. We can't do this alone. And consider how you are going to leave your legacy. Consider how you're going to impact that one person, to bring them into clinical research, to tell them about it at a pool party, to encourage your sponsor and site relationships, to empower them to say no to trials that aren't well developed. And within your teams, to take care of each other. Because we cannot allow people to leave this profession. We need every single one of you. We need to grow this profession to meet the demand, and we need to do it in a way that instills trust and transparency, where we're excited every day to come to work, and we know exactly why we do this. Even on those really difficult days, even when you're wanting to run away or you don't want to come back on a Monday morning, but rather let's start our Monday mornings with why we do this and reminding ourselves that it is important.